Yesterday, I recorded this episode. By the end of the recording, it was about 50 minutes long before editing, and saved it and pulled it up for editing, and there was absolutely nothing recorded. So I'm really hoping that that doesn't happen again. But I've got a really good topic to talk about today. We're going to be discussing core beliefs versus conscious beliefs, and I'll get into that. But of course, because it's me and this is how I do it, we're going to start with a little story time first. Of course, that's going to start with talking about something with current events that triggered something for me. And in this case, it's Usha Vance and Erica Kirk. And right now featuring my cat Beatrix, who is very, very upset that I'm not opening this door to let her in. So you might hear her protesting and meowing and trying to open the door herself in the background. Hi, welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Naomi, and this is Mosaic in Progress. Beatrix, stop. So the whole Usha Vance, Erica Kirk thing, if you're not on social media or watching the news, your mental health is probably a whole lot better than mine. Good for you. But if you haven't been following it, Erica Kirk made a pretty inappropriate display at an event with JD Vance on stage, and everyone is talking about Usha Vance, JD Vance's wife, and how she's feeling, or speculations about her being targeted, or blaming her and saying she got what she married and all of this. And the first thing that I want to point out is that JD Vance wasn't always this extremist. In 2016, JD Vance called Donald Trump Hitler. So to act like he has always been this way is pretty disingenuous. And the other thing about it is, if you watched any footage of her and him at all at Jimmy Carter's funeral, then you know that she is in an abusive relationship. Women who have been in abusive relationships, whether it was a parental abusive relationship or a spousal abusive relationship or some other romantic partner type of abusive relationship, recognized the body language that happened there. I know I did immediately when he whipped his head around to look at her when something was being said by the speaker. That was immediately to make sure that she was reacting in the way that he wanted her to react. I recognized that immediately. That was not, can you believe that was said? That was, you better react the way that I want you to react, or you're going to be in trouble. I've talked before about a lot about the abuse that my father put me through, but I don't think I've ever really talked about the timeline of me realizing something was wrong and getting out. So I really started to kind of feel like something really wasn't right when I was about 11 years old. When I was 12, I really started questioning things. By the time I was 13, I was in full-blown rebellion, but I tried to hide it because I had to. I was homeschooled. We had church at home, and we didn't go anywhere unless my mom took us there. So I didn't really have the opportunity for rebellion, but internally, I very much was. And as much as I could get away with online, I was. And at 14 years old was when my dad beat me with a 2-by-6. And it was after that I have described as going into full-blown Stockholm Syndrome, which I have recently learned is an incorrect term, that it's a made-up term. It's not a diagnosis, that it was made up to describe women who didn't agree with the man who gave the term. But it's more accurately described as trauma bonding and a fawn response. But that's what happened. I just agreed with everything, and I had myself convinced that I believed it. and went along with everything. I was wearing skirts and dresses. I quit wearing pants because that was a thing my dad felt very strongly about. I grew my hair out. I was reading the Bible all the time. I did whatever he wanted me to and whatever I was supposed to. And I graduated high school at 18. Immediately became very depressed because I had made no career plans. Had no plans for college or a job. I was going to get married and have kids because that's what God wanted me to do. Having no marital prospects on the horizon was pretty depressing for me because my life was just nothing. There was nothing for me. A few months after I graduated, my dad told me that I had to get a job. I was shocked and horrified. And I got a job working at McDonald's. He said it would help me learn to manage money, which would be a thing that would be useful to me once I did have a husband. I worked there for about a month. I took another job working at an independent pharmacy. I was a pharmacy tech there. I just filled prescriptions and stocked shelves, with the new merchandise that came in. I worked there for about 6 months. That was when my dad had been having some serious discussions with me about going to college and why it was a good idea. And I had decided that I wanted to go to college so that I could have a bachelor's degree because I was planning to homeschool my children. In Georgia, you had to have a bachelor's degree to give standardized tests that kids have to take in school. My mom had a bachelor's degree, so she always gave us our tests. If you didn't have one, you would have to rely on the school system or someone else to give the tests to your kids. So I wanted to be able to do it myself. And so it was decided that I was going to go to college. I chose agribusiness as my major because I'd been heavily involved in 4-H and I thought I could get some scholarships if I picked that major. And I think I was 2 semesters in when my dad said, "You seem like you care about things that are actually important. Have you thought about going into political science?" And I said I had not, but I would consider it. And I considered it and changed my major. And I came home and told him that. And this was not like the next day I did it. I considered it over like a few weeks. And I came home and told him that I had changed it to political science. And he was very upset because I had done it without asking him. And I was very confused because it was his idea. I was just going along with his idea. But he was very upset. And after I changed my major to political science, I was working in politics, volunteering, I was working my ass off and putting in probably 60 hours or more a week for the work, but I was not getting paid. I forgot to mention that when I started college, my dad made me quit my job. He said I couldn't have the job and go to college at the same time. So I quit my job at the pharmacy way in advance, actually, of when I was going to school, because I quit in like March, I want to say, something like that, March or April, and I didn't start school until August. So he made me quit that job. And then I was working on my degree in political science. My dad made me change colleges 3 times. It was very ironic because my older sister, he refused to let her use the Hope Scholarship. We lived in Georgia. Because he said that it would be wrong to do so because Hope Scholarship is funded by lottery money and lottery is sin. So to take that is to take sinful money. And I think he said something to her along the lines of, would you take money that was donated to you from whores or drug dealers? It's the same thing. So no Hope Scholarship for my sister, but me and my little sister did get to use it because he had conveniently decided that it was not sinful at that point. So I had to change colleges 3 times, and I was working with a candidate. I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but it was also my dad connected me with this candidate, and he was like, "Oh, you should volunteer for this campaign." So I got very heavily involved in that. And shortly after that that campaign was over, I quit going to college like one semester before I finished my degree, an associate's degree. Let me be very clear on that. I was not one semester away from a bachelor's degree. There was a tornado that came through the area where I lived, and so my little sister and I were helping with relief efforts, and I was offered a job at this local American Legion being a waitress. And so I was a waitress that worked for tips for about a year. I left out part. I did eventually finish my degree. I took a year and a half break. And then I went back and finished that one semester. So I have an associate's in political science. That's good for saying that I have an associate's in political science, and that's about it. During the time that I was working as a waitress, I was sexually assaulted, and my whole everything turned upside down, and I started having to question everything again, because I was raised with the belief that if you don't fight back, it's your fault. My mother said that was biblical. And I knew that I didn't want it, and I knew that I had said no. And so that really didn't jive with what I knew to be true. I started questioning everything. And while I was questioning everything, I was dealing with horrific post-traumatic stress and nightmares and flashbacks, and having absolutely no coping mechanisms to deal with that kind of trauma, or anyone to lean on who would help me, any resources or community of any kind. I started abusing alcohol and self-harming. And as I was trying to pull out of that, I had read something that said to draw on yourself with a red Sharpie instead of cutting yourself, that it might give you a similar sensation and visual without actually hurting yourself. And I had been trying that, and I was doing it in areas where people wouldn't see, because I never cut myself in areas where people could see it. The one time that I did, sort of without thinking, I had to make the excuse and say that one of the cats had scratched me, and everyone was very concerned about it for a long time, because it was a pretty, I don't need to get into this. Anyway, so my shirt pulled up, and they saw this drawing on me with a red Sharpie, and flipped out, lost their minds. My dad called me a slut and a liar. My mom was crying. And to this day, I'm still very confused about that. It was such an extreme reaction for me having drawn on myself. And they told me they were going to kick me out. But they knew that I could not support myself, so they were going to pay for me to go get some sort of a certification where I could get a job that would pay more than minimum wage. So they paid for me to go to CNA school. And somewhere along the way of going to CNA school, they completely forgot that they were going to kick me out. But at this point, I'm making plans, because I'm like, I can't keep doing this. This was a repetitive pattern in my late teens and early 20s, was that they were always threatening to kick me out. And they didn't just do that to me. They did it to my sisters as well. More my little sister than my older sister. My older sister was not as rebellious, but I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I can't always be afraid that I'm not going to have somewhere to live. I'm not going to have a home. So I had decided that I wanted to be a doctor, and I had decided that I was going to go to nursing school first so that I could make decent money, because CNAs do not make decent money, and be able to work while getting my bachelor's degree, then go to med school, because I knew they weren't going to let me go to med school, because that's a career and ungodly. And so I was making my plans to get out. They tried to make me quit my job in nursing school, because I was working as a CNA through nursing school. I made the excuse, that I need to keep this job so that I have a job waiting for me whenever I finish nursing school. Because the CNA school was because I said I wanted to be a nurse and they said I couldn't handle it. And I said, can I go to CNA school and we'll see? They said, sure, and kind of laughed at me. So I got my CNA job in September of 2012 and graduated nursing school May of 2015. I have not been unemployed since that time till 3 weeks ago. At the time of this recording, by the time this is published, it'll be 4 weeks. But this is the longest that I've been unemployed in my adult life since like 2010, when my dad made me quit to go to college. And it's a really weird feeling, and it's a very scary feeling, and it's bringing up a whole lot of trauma for me with, like, not currently being able to rely on myself to take care of myself. But all of that to say, the time that I realized that things just weren't quite right to the time that I actually moved out was about 16 years. And granted, I was a child when I realized things weren't quite right. But there are children who leave their home at 16. There are people who leave their parents immediately at 18. It took me 16 years from the time I knew something wasn't right until I got out. And then it was another several years. Let me see. It was another 6 years before I cut my dad off completely. It took me 22 years to cut ties with my dad from the time that I knew something just really wasn't right, that this was not how things were supposed to be. 22 years. And so when you say about a woman in an abusive relationship that she should just leave, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You don't know that experience. And Usha Vance is never going to hear you say that. But your friend who's trying to leave her abusive relationship is. Your friend who did leave an abusive relationship and it took her a long time to do it is. And they're going to know that they can't rely on you for shit because you're too judgmental. So think about the things that you say about public figures, not because of the public figures, because they're never going to hear it, but because your friends are. These are people. And we forget that so often with public figures. These are people. And I understand that if you're of the kind of person that I've been seeing posting online about Usha Vance, you don't feel sympathy for her, and you're not going to by hearing what I say. But think about how it's affecting the people who you know, and maybe have a little compassion and empathy for the situation. Thinking about this and just the dichotomy of knowing what you deserve and living that out, it's had me thinking. I've been deep in my head for the last 3 weeks, because that's what happens when you're unemployed, and you are alone with nothing but you and your thoughts. I've been thinking a lot about core beliefs versus conscious beliefs, because as I've been examining things and trying to mitigate the panic attacks and the fear that I'm dealing with not having an income, especially in this economy, some things have come up for me, and I've realized that I don't feel safe to feel my feelings. And I know exactly where it comes from, because when I was a teenager, I started cutting myself off from my feelings. Around the time that I realized that everything was really fucked up, I realized that my dad saw me as weak because I cried over things, because I reacted to things. And I figured out, I worked really hard on it, how to detach myself from my feelings and emotions so that someone could do something horrible to me and I would stare at them with an icy cold stare, unflinching. And my dad respected me more for that, because he would talk about how girls just are emotional and they're not logical and they just have all these feelings, because he had the typical misogynistic view that feelings are bad unless the feeling is anger and you're a man, in which case anger is not really a feeling or an emotion. That's just a logical reaction to things. But if you're a woman and you're angry, then you're just crazy. So I figured out how to just not feel anything and to just dissociate from my feelings. And that has served me not at all in life. Let me tell you, that has been a terrible, terrible, terrible hang up for me, and made everything in my life more difficult. So thanks for that, Dad. To be fair, he didn't tell me to do that. I chose to do that on my own, just as a response to his emotional and verbal abuse. But cutting myself off from my feelings makes processing any sort of trauma or stress or whatever very difficult. Because at this point, it's like I've dammed the whole ocean and I have no idea what's going to happen when I let it go. It's like destruction and chaos awaits. And I've been trying to work on sitting with that. My therapist told me earlier this week that I need to just take time and sit with my feelings. And I said, that sounds terrible. That sounds like a terrible idea, but I'll try it. And it has gone terribly, because I try to sit with my feelings and there's just like this block where my brain and my body are like, we're not going there. That's a dangerous place. And this is why it's called Mosaic in Progress, because it's not done yet. It's still a work in progress. We're still putting the pieces back together. And this one's a doozy. And it got compounded earlier this week because after realizing that feelings don't feel safe to me and having that meeting with my therapist, then I was invited to join a fire ceremony. And part of the ceremony was, as we made an offering to the fire, we considered our childhood wounds and offered those to the fire for cleansing and healing. And as I sat and considered them, it came to me that love really doesn't feel safe. My parents were not what I consider typical abusers. And when I say that, I'm speaking out of the stories that I've heard of other people who were abused in childhood in similar ways that I was. My parents were very loving in the window dressing sense of the word. They always gave me hugs and kisses. They tucked me in at night. They'd tell me they loved me all the time. It was just, everything else, and not accepting who I was as a person and constantly making me feel like there was something wrong with me. So I really believed that they loved me. And even after cutting off my dad, I still believed my mom loved me in her own fucked up way. And it's so much safer for my brain to believe what it believes than that my parents just didn't love me. This is where the core beliefs versus conscious beliefs come in, because my conscious beliefs and my core beliefs are at odds with each other. And if you're not familiar with the term core beliefs, because I wasn't until a few years ago, core beliefs are the things that you use to guide you. It's not necessarily something that you think about consciously, but it's your guiding principles that make up how you show up in the world. Things like, I am worthy, I am lovable, I deserve good things, everything's always working out for me, people are basically good. Those are examples of core beliefs. People who have been in abusive situations, especially in childhood, who were raised with abusive mentality, typically have core beliefs that don't serve them. And most of the time they're not conscious. Sometimes they are. But this is why you see repeated patterns with people who have been in very traumatic or abusive situations where they have substance abuse or continue to be in abusive relationships, because the core beliefs don't serve them. The core beliefs are at odds with their best interests. Like my core beliefs are that I am unlovable, that I have to work to get the things that I need, that I don't deserve good things, that when bad things happen to me, it's my fault, that I have to earn anything good in my life. And these are not my conscious beliefs. These are not what I want to believe. But no amount of positive affirmations or shamanic work or ketamine therapy has been able to change those core beliefs. And that's why I take jobs that I don't want, that I'm not happy at. That's why I accept friendships that drain me. That's why I have been in relationships where I am not treated well, because I don't think that I deserve any better. That is not correctly stated. I think that I deserve better. I don't believe that I deserve better. And consciously, my beliefs are the examples that I stated as core beliefs earlier. But these are not my core beliefs. At my core, I believe that I am unlovable. I don't like that. I don't want to keep believing that. But it is so ingrained in me that none of my work has managed to change it. And so when things happen, like being forced to resign from a job that I was doing very well at, all I can see is everything collapsing around me. That's not where I want to be. This is not how I want to live my life. That's not how I want to show up. And one of my earliest episodes was on chakras and the hierarchy of needs. And the belief that you are lovable is like one of those root chakra basic need beliefs. Because you have to believe that you're worthy of being taken care of to accept someone taking care of you. You have to believe that you belong, that you're worthy of belonging to be able to grow the roots. And the reason that I bring this up is because sometimes our core beliefs get in the way of us living the life that we want to live. And sometimes we don't even realize that. As an example, I spoke, I think, in a recent episode about this book I read called The Power. It's like the sequel to The Secret. And it was talking about abuse and situations of injustice and how to wrap your head around that and how to deal with it energetically as someone who's trying to align with love and manifest their dream life or whatever. And one of the things that it talked about was instead of focusing on the injustice and the negative emotions, focus on loving the victims and doing things that are loving toward the victims. And the problem with that comes in that so many people think that fighting for justice is an act of love. And so if you are focusing on fighting for justice, then your energy is going toward the negative emotions. And this is not to say, hey, sit down, stop fighting for justice. This is not the point of this at all. The point is to be mindful of your energy, your emotions, and your feelings, because if you're getting wrapped up in the sadness or the anger about what's going on, and that's where you're dwelling, then you're not focused on building the new life. Anger has its purpose as a catalyst for change, but you shouldn't live there. Not if you really want things to be different. Not if you really want to make the change. Because the focus has to be on love. The focus has to be on the change that you want. And justice versus manifestation is a very fine line, tightrope to walk. Because it's okay to want justice, but you have to be very careful of where your energy is going and what you're focusing on. Is it that you want this person who's evil hurt, or is it that you want this person who is hurt to have a better life, to receive their recompense or whatever? Because as we're working on making changes in ourselves and in the world around us, you have to believe in the reality that you want. And if your core beliefs don't align with that, work on your core beliefs. Figure out how to change that. Figure it out, let me know, because work in progress. Where your focus goes is where your energy flows. Your focus determines your reality. As an example, because we mentioned Erica Kirk earlier in the episode, I know people who are huge fans of Charlie Kirk. Those people never once heard him say anything racist and actually defended pretty handily that he wasn't racist and talked about certain things that he said that proved he was not racist. When confronted with the reality of the very racist things that he said, they became very angry and claimed it was taken out of context and etc. But because their algorithm, and algorithm is just a computerized focus, gave them what they aligned with, they never saw any of the other stuff. And I know people who were not at all familiar with Charlie Kirk, who never saw anything except for his racist and misogynistic comments. They didn't hear any of the things that he said because that were actually good, because not saying he was a great example, but he actually had some good talking points sometimes. And he said some things that were very inspiring to a lot of people, and not inspiring like, okay, get your hoods, let's go to a KKK rally. Like actually motivating and inspiring and loving. But because they were focused on one thing and these other people were focused on another thing, they had two completely separate, diametrically opposed views of the same person based on his own words. Your focus determines your reality. So what are you focusing on? Are you focusing on the bills that you can't pay, or are you focusing on the opportunities that are available to you? Are you focusing on the world collapsing around you, or are you focusing on the community that you're building and the joy that is within it and the camaraderie of your neighbors and how you're standing together? We have to control our focus because it's really the only thing that we have control over. There's so much chaos in this world, and when things are chaotic, we feel out of control. But the fact of the matter is that whether things are chaotic or whether things are calm and peaceful, you have exactly the same amount of control. You can breathe, and you can control your focus. You can control your words, and you can control your action. You can control what you spend your money on. You can control what you spend your time on. Your control is over yourself only. And if you feel that you don't have control over your own self, examine that. Is someone else in control of you? Can you change that? Someone else was in control of me for a long time, but you know what I could do? I could still think my own thoughts. I couldn't get out of that house. I had no financial way of getting out of that house. There were times that I dreamed about waiting till everyone was asleep and had been asleep for a while and then sneaking out of the house. And I figured if I started about 11 o'clock at night and started walking, I could make it to the highway before the sun had come up. It was about 5 miles, and maybe I could hitchhike somewhere from there. Sometimes I wish I had done that. But hindsight's 20/20, and wishing for things to be different in the past doesn't get you anywhere. All you can do is focus on where you're at and where you're going. So what are your core beliefs? What guides you? What shapes how you show up in the world? And what are you focusing on? Why are you focusing on that? And is that focus serving you for where you want to go and where you want to be? A little over 3 years ago, I started this podcast, and I can't believe it's been 3 years, and I can't believe I missed the 3-year anniversary. I didn't say a single thing about it. But shortly before starting the podcast, I was dreaming of leaving healthcare. It was a very good means to an end, and the end was my freedom from my abusive situation. But healthcare in and of itself has become an abusive relationship. Being a nurse is not what it used to be, and it's not what it was when I started it. And I thought, maybe I could start a Patreon. If I get enough followers, I'll start a Patreon. And as I spoke about, I think it was not this last episode, but the one before that, I think, a lot of people are leaving Spotify and Apple Music and Apple Podcasts and all of the major platforms where podcasts are hosted. And I've been trying to figure out where I could host my podcast, because it's on some of the smaller ones as well. But where I could host it that people are going to, so that I can continue to do this work. And then I realized I can put it on Patreon for free. And so I did. I have a Patreon up now. If you're following me on social media, the link is in my link tree that's in my bio. If you're not following me on social media, go to linktree.com/mosaic in progress, and you will find the link there, or you can search on Patreon. It's Mosaic in Progress Official. And there's a free tier, and you will get podcasts on Sundays on the free tier, or there are 4 paid tiers. The lowest paid tier is just the podcast support, and you'll get the podcast a couple of days early. And then there's higher tiers with more content that will be available, live Q&As and vlogs and poetry and other content that I create sometimes. And they're all named after my fur babies, which have been featured on this podcast in one way or another. You've heard the collar jingles, or the meows, or the purrs, or the sneezes in Mr. Kitty's case. But each tier is named after one of my little fur babies. And I hope you'll follow me on there, even if you're not able to buy one of the paid tiers. This has been a dream of mine for a long time. I'm really excited to launch this, and I'm hoping that this will be something that grows and turns into an amazing community where there's more interaction. And speaking of interaction, if you are following me on social media, would you go click over to my pages and just give something a little like, or leave a little comment on something. My friends have recently informed me that even though they were following me on social media and had me marked as a favorite, my posts aren't showing up in anyone's feed. So, not to sound like a beggar, but please interact with me, so that the posts do show up in people's feeds and the algorithm is pleased. I think that's all for this week. Thank you everyone so much for joining me. And those of you who have followed me for a long time, thank you so much. I can't tell you what it means to me to be able to do this, to be able to tell my story, and the feedback that I get from people, and how much that it means to them, and the people who say that it is relatable and they don't feel alone. That was always my reason for doing this. I felt so alone for most of my life, and my whole reason for telling my story is so that other people don't feel that, because you're not alone. I love you all so much. Thank you again, and please join me next week as we both continue to work on our Mosaic in Progress.